We are starting this morning in Genesis chapter 13. And so let's go ahead and let's get going. So Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev with his wife and everything he had, and Lot went with him. Abram had become very wealthy in livestock and in silver and in gold. From the Negev, he went from place to place until he came to Bethel, to the place between Bethel and Ai, where his tent had been earlier, and where he had first built an altar. There Abraham called on the name of the Lord. Okay, let's go and let's talk about this just for a minute. So he is coming up from Egypt. What was he doing in Egypt? Remember back in chapter 12, he had begun his journey to Canaan, and then there was a famine in verse 10. Now there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to live there for a while because the famine was severe. So this famine had driven him into Egypt, much like it did much later with Joseph's family. But let's go ahead and let's look back up here a little bit further in verse 12, where it's chapter 12 in verse 6, where it says, so Abram traveled through the land as far as the side of the great tree. And no. Okay, let's just go back to 13. I want to hit this first, and then we'll go back to that. So they were in Egypt, and what happened while they were in Egypt? Well, while he was there, that's when he began to stumble around. He stumbled into Egypt because of the famine. Maybe not stumbled, he fled there. And then he went there with Pharaoh. He went to underneath the protection of Pharaoh, and he was concerned that they would try to take Sarah from him, or Sarai from him, which they did because she was so beautiful, even though she was so old. And Abraham went ahead and gave her up to them. And then Pharaoh had all this trouble and confronted Abram, and he got his wife back, and then Pharaoh sent him on his way. So Abram had been given a word from the Lord, and let's read that up in chapter 12, verse 6. The Lord appeared to Abram and said to him, your offspring I will give this land, so build an altar there. So he built an altar there in the name of the Lord, who had appeared to him. From there he went toward the hills and all of these things, and he called on the name of the Lord. Then the famine came. So this is what it looks like. So Abram had heard the voice of the Lord. He had seen him. He had appeared to him there. Originally he heard his voice at the beginning of verse 12. Chapter 12. I'm going to get that right. Chapter 12. And then the Lord had actually appeared to him. Then there was a famine, and there's all this debacle with Sarai. And then he was coming back down from Egypt. Have we ever done that, where we have had this incredible experience with the Lord, and he has called us? We have actually feel like we had a really incredible connection with him, and he confirmed that calling, that he said, I'm going to do something amazing in your life. And he even appeared to Abraham there, and he built an altar, and there was this incredible experience with God. And then something happened. A famine in the land happened. And so this circumstance, it pushed him to a place that he hadn't planned on going, a place that maybe the Lord had not planned on him going. And that's something that it doesn't say that the Lord didn't tell him to go to Egypt. It's just that there was a famine, so that's where he went. But while he was there was some stumbling around. There was some altering in his faith, because he was afraid. First of all, he fled where God had said, this belongs to you. He left there. And then he became afraid. And so he let Sarah go into another man's household because he was afraid for his life. And so this great man of faith that is the founding father of everything that we know and we believe, and that he was the first one that God appeared to, and we are his children, this guy, he messed up. And I think that that's an interesting thing to note, and yet understand that for me, what does that mean? Well, so Abram, the Lord God had given him a promise. He had it confirmed in a beautiful high place. He built an altar there. The Lord had appeared to him. And then he stumbled around, but where did he go back to? Well, let's go ahead and let's read that again in chapter 13. From the Negev, he went from the place to place until he came to Bethel, to the place between Bethel and Ai, where his tent had been earlier, and where he had first built an altar. There Abram called on the name of the Lord. So what happened here? He went to Egypt. He messed up. He gathered his belongings back up, and he headed back to the place that the Lord had first appeared to him. So that place, that high place where God had shown himself, And Abram began to call on the name of the Lord. Now, it doesn't say the Lord appeared to him again here at this point. It just says that Abraham then turned his eyes back to God and said, you know what, I need you so desperately. And that was a really close call in Egypt. And thank you for sparing me, because I almost lost my life. I almost lost my wife trying to spare my own life. And so and it was a famine, and God, that was so scary. And it was, I was consumed with fear over these things. First the famine, and then I'm going to lose my life, and then I'm going to lose my wife, and now it's happening. And then the Lord directed him to come back to the place where he had first encountered him. So in our lives, when we're going through difficult situations, when we feel like maybe we have been forced into Egypt because of a famine, or we're consumed with worry because some situation in our life has caused us to stumble away from the Lord because of anxiety or dread, or maybe impatience on our part. The Lord is so faithful. Just run back. Run back to that place where you encountered him. And not in a backward moving way, but in a forward moving way. Go to the place where you know the Lord is. That would be in the Word, in worship. These places where you've encountered God, run back there. Just like you are today, just like you're getting in the Word today. And the Lord will be faithful to protect us, to guide us, direct us, just like he does later on this chapter. And that's where we're going to go next. So you guys hang on.